Revenge with Karen.
I knew something stank the moment I saw a $14 sandwich get billed as strategic workforce enhancement. You don't forget a line item like that, especially when the invoice says it was consumed during a training retreat at a Hooters in Delaware. But I smiled, like always, nodded through the Monday morning finance sink, while everyone else scrolled through their phones, and sipped cold brew like we weren't all passengers on a sinking ship, captained by a guy who still thought the word agile meant we lie faster. That week, I'd cleaned up 3 duplicate invoices, 2 ghost vendors, and a rebranding expense that turned out to be a first-class flight to Vegas for the VP's girlfriend, who didn't even work at the company. I fixed them all. Quietly, like I always did. That was my thing. Barbara the fixer, Barbara the lifer, Barbara who remembered what this place used to feel like before the merger turned it into a circus tent duct taped to a Ponzi scheme. They thought I didn't see it, that I was just an aging cog with an Outlook calendar and a drawer full of Altoids. But I saw everything. I always had. The cracks were widening. The numbers didn't just look wrong, they smelled wrong. Ever sniff an Excel sheet and think, yep, that's fraud with a side of cologne and desperation? Because I have. That's how this started. And hey, before we go deeper, do me a quick favor. Most folks listen to these stories without hitting subscribe or like, which is wild considering how much coffee it takes to relive this crap out loud. So if you're enjoying this slow descent into corporate hell with a side of revenge, hit that little heart and toss us a subscribe. Keeps the lights on and the drama flowing. Now, back to Barbara. I worked in ops, which meant I was the human Roomba for broken data. Anything the new folks messed up, I fixed it before legal saw it. They called me old school, which was code for she remembers when this company actually had ethics. I wore loafers, brought my own lunch, still used paper clips. I was invisible, but in that way a floorboard creaks, always underfoot, always present, just quiet enough that no one pays attention until it gives out. The merger had changed everything. Suddenly, we weren't the scrappy Midwest logistics team with a decent mission and tight books. Now we were innovative disruptors, which apparently meant we ignored audits and blew marketing budgets on crypto seminars, and TikTok influencers with names like Finance Babe 420. The new VP of Operations came in hot, Armani suit, fake humility, LinkedIn buzzwords tattooed across his forehead. He strutted in like he was saving us. Within a month, he'd fired 2 finance managers, promoted a guy who didn't know what a ledger was, and streamlined our internal review process by disabling approval chains. That's when I started really watching. I didn't make a sound. I didn't send warning emails or call for help. I just watched, took notes, quietly fixed what I could because I still gave a damn, even if no one else did. I had 2 monitors. One showed our reporting dashboard. The other, my own little side project, a spreadsheet called Unexplained. By week 3, it had 12 entries. By week 5, it had 43, all tiny red flags, misnamed vendors, rounded amounts, inconsistencies between invoice dates and payment records. Each one small enough to ignore. Together, they painted a picture. Not a pretty one. One day, I stayed late to reconcile a set of duplicate payments. The timestamps were identical, but the amounts weren't. Someone had cloned the transaction and rerouted part of the difference. I traced it through a payment processor we'd supposedly stopped using last year. When I brought it up to my manager, he just chuckled and said, "Don't ask questions above your pay grade, Babs." That was the moment. The switch flipped. They weren't just ignoring the mess, they liked it messy. Needed it messy because mess hides things. Mess gives people like that VP room to maneuver, so I made a decision. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to tattle. I was going to document, quietly, thoroughly, like a ghost accountant haunting their little embezzlement party. They thought Barbara was just the weird lady with the sensible shoes who always had printer toner. What they didn't realize was I was the protocol. I was the system. I was about to do what they never expected. I was going to take all their garbage home. The first vendor that didn't sit right with me was something called Core Path Dynamics. Now, I've been neck-deep in vendor lists for the better part of 2 decades. I know every name that's passed through our books like I know every mole on my ex-husband's back, unfortunate, unforgettable, and full of bad decisions. But Core Path Dynamics, never heard of it. No onboarding forms, no tax ID in the shared drive, no service description. Just an entry tucked into the quarterly report under Training and Development External. Price tag, $87,000 for what? A virtual leadership workshop series. Right, and I'm the Queen of England. I flagged it, opened my unexplained spreadsheet, and gave it its own tab. Traced the payment. It had cleared in two parts, one for $45K, another for $42K, split over two departments that had nothing to do with leadership, sales and logistics, neither of which had any record of attending any training at all. I asked around casually, the kind of water cooler whisper where you're just trying to catch up on vendor comms. Blank stares. One guy even asked if it was part of the new onboarding for our interns. Vendor 2 was worse. Talent Synergy Group billed us $68,000 for employee resilience sessions. What the hell does that even mean? You think we've got meditation monks whispering affirmations to the freight team between pickups? I dug through the record. Same payment pattern. Broken up into two separate invoices, funneled through different approval paths. And the kicker, the listed point of contact didn't exist in the directory. I emailed them anyway, just to see. Bounce back. Address not found. The third vendor was the cherry on top. Insight Horizons, LLC. Billed us $65,000 for strategic transformation alignment. You know what that is? It's corporate gibberish, Stu. That's not a service. That's a bad Scrabble hand. I looked them up, nothing. No website, no social media presence. Registered in Delaware, of course. Every dirty secret is registered in Delaware. That's $220,000. Gone, for nothing. Now, I'm not naive. I know some companies use fluff vendors to move money around. Had the books funnel kickbacks. I'd even seen a few questionable things back in the early 2010s before we got serious about compliance. But this wasn't sloppy. It was orchestrated, deliberate. It had rhythm, it danced. So I did what I always do. I cleaned up the report, removed the anomalies from the visible roll-up, and tagged the original entries in my private log. Not because I was covering for them, but because I needed more time. I needed a full picture before someone noticed I was paying attention. I brought the first vendor up with my manager during our Friday check-in. Just casually, like I wasn't already halfway through building a digital murder board. Hey, I saw this Core Path Dynamics expense in Q2. Do you remember who onboarded them? He didn't even look up. Just shrugged and muttered, "Don't ask questions above your pay grade, Babs." It wasn't just dismissive. It was practiced. He'd said it before, like he'd been told to say it. That's when the unease settled in. That hollow, dry feeling behind your teeth when you realize you're not just dealing with incompetence. You're dealing with something intentional. And the people smiling through meetings, cracking jokes about HR compliance training, they're in on it. Maybe not all of them, but enough. The next morning, I showed up an hour early, poured my coffee, plugged in my encrypted drive, made copies of the vendor invoices, snapshots of the transaction logs, screenshots of the approval chains, PDF backups of internal memos with names I hadn't seen before. I uploaded them to a folder on my home server labeled Old Recipes. You laugh, but no one's checking a folder called Grandma's Meatloaf. Especially when the meatloaf is zipped and password protected with a 24-character string that includes the VP's birthday and my cat's name. The time Tuesday rolled around, I had 5 vendors flagged. Total discrepancy, $379,000. And nobody was asking questions. The finance team was too burned out. The compliance lead had moved on to other opportunities 2 months prior. And the new VP? He was too busy posting humble brags on LinkedIn about turnaround excellence and driving synergy through innovative mindsets. But here's the thing about me. Don't need synergy. I need receipts, so I started collecting. Quietly, thoroughly, one ghost invoice at a time. It started with a file named Team Budget Q2 Adjusted XLSX. Nothing flashy, nothing bold. Just a spreadsheet I'd massaged into shape after 3 rounds of internal revisions, flagged anomalies, and quiet corrections that no one above me seemed to give a flying damn about. It wasn't even the worst offender. It was just the first one that made my hands shake slightly when I clicked Save As. The original showed a $13,000 variance in logistics training. The adjusted one, mine, corrected it to 0 and highlighted the delta in red. The problem? No one ever asked why there was a delta. No one even opened the comments tab. When I submitted the clean version for final review, My manager replied with a thumbs up emoji and the word solid. So I saved the redlined version to a folder on my encrypted thumb drive labeled Weekend Review. That phrase was my little fiction. I told myself I was just being thorough, just a little behind on reconciling figures. Nothing wrong with doing a bit of work at home, right? Who could fault a dedicated, underpaid cog in the wheel for trying to get ahead of the mess? But it wasn't just for me. Bought the encrypted drive 6 months earlier after a brief flirtation with early retirement fantasies and a desperate urge to catalog every last email and file I might need to freelance later. Back then, it was just a nest egg of templates and SOPs. Now, it was becoming something else. A vault. That Friday night, after logging off and pouring 2 fingers of bottom shelf whiskey into a chipped mug, I sat on the couch in my Ohio townhouse and opened Gmail, drafted the email like it was a note to myself. Subject, for Monday. Body, clean version submitted. Keeping raw here just in case. B. Attachment. Team budget Q2 adjusted XLSX. I hovered over the send button longer than I'd ever hovered over anything in my life. Not because I was scared of getting caught. They weren't smart enough to monitor internal email routing at that level. But because this felt like a step over a line I couldn't walk back from. For this, it had all been in my head. My suspicions, my private notes, my spreadsheets named after casseroles and bingo nights. But the moment I hit send, I was creating a trail. One they couldn't see, but one that existed nonetheless. My insurance policy, my slow, cold insurance policy. Click, sent. And just like that, the line was crossed. The next week, I sent 2 more. One file detailing vendor spend discrepancies, other a screenshot compilation of purchase approvals with mismatched timestamps. I kept the subject lines boring. For review, training log edit, follow-up from call. You know, the kind of banal stuff no VP would ever read even if they were CC'd. I even started printing a few things, real paper, like the old days. I'd take them home in my tote bag, sandwiched between my planner and a copy of Reader's Digest. If anyone asked, it was weekend cleanup, but no one ever asked. They were too busy slapping each other on the back for cutting costs and ignoring the rot blooming under the floorboards. By the end of the month, I had 13 files on my encrypted drive, every one of them time-stamped, cross-referenced, and labeled in my own system. The rules were simple. Never save from work email to personal email directly. Never talk about the files at work. Never access the encrypted drive from the office. Always act like everything is fine. I became the queen of everything is fine, smiling in the Monday morning meeting while they bragged about budget wins, nodding through their pie charts of imaginary growth. They had no idea I was spending my evenings laying the bricks of their funeral pyre, one pivot table at a time. It's funny. People think rebellion is loud. Picketers, whistleblowers, chain emails, lawsuits. But the truth is, most rebellions start with something small. One email, one copied file, one glance at a number that doesn't belong and the quiet voice inside you that says, don't let this go. So no, I didn't print signs. I didn't make noise. I sent myself an Excel sheet, and that was the beginning of the end. It's hard to take a man seriously when he's wearing a $14,000 watch but can't figure out how to unlock a PDF. Yet there he was, our freshly imported VP of Operations, strutting into meetings like a Wall Street wolf who got lost on his way to the IPO and wound up stuck managing a logistics firm in Ohio. Every time he entered the conference room, you could practically hear the sound of Axe body spray colliding with unchecked ego. He liked to start Monday stand-ups with motivational quotes, misattributed, of course. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take, Steve Jobs, that kind of thing. Everyone fake laughed. I smiled too. But it wasn't joy curling behind my teeth. It was calculation. The watch was new. Some overpolished Rolex with a band so reflective you'd think he was trying to signal aircraft. He'd check it mid-meeting like we were wasting his time, as if the rest of us weren't being paid to clean up the digital sewage spilling from his brilliant new efficiency initiatives. One of those initiatives came wrapped in an email titled, Audit Bottlenecks, Let's Move Past Bureaucracy. It was a direct override of a recommendation from our internal audit team, who'd flagged a newly onboarded vendor. Take a wild guess, Core Path Dynamics. The auditors wanted a halt on payments until validation documents were received. They'd asked for tax filings, point of contact info, a service agreement. All pretty standard stuff unless you're, say, laundering money through a front LLC that operates out of a UPS store. The VP's reply? Let's not let compliance paralyze innovation. Release the funds. We're not the IRS. He actually wrote that in an email that got logged. My fingers were trembling when I saved a screenshot of it to my encrypted drive. Labeled it Innovation LOL PDF. That same week, I noticed something rhythmic. VP's name kept appearing in the approval logs for external training vendors, ones that had never gone through standard procurement. He was signing off on them personally. Every single one. He was cutting compliance out entirely, just slapping his digital signature on shady contracts and waving them through like some kind of budget pope, blessing dirty invoices. I double-checked the workflow system. Historically, these types of payments had at least 3 layers of approval. Department head, compliance officer, CFO. Now, just him. No oversight, no flags, well, except for me. One vendor, Insight Horizons, received 3 separate payments in a single quarter, each $125K, just below the threshold that would trigger automatic review. Clever, that's how you do it. You don't steal $1 million at once. You steal 20 grand 40 times. I mentioned one of the duplicate payments in passing to finance. They shrugged. Must be another vendor rebranding. Someone muttered. Yeah, sure. Because the same vendor renames themselves every 5 weeks like they're on the run from the FBI. I watched him roll through the office that month like he owned the place. Rearranging departments, cutting teams, hiring consultants whose qualifications were mostly plays golf with the right people. He loved buzzwords. Synergy. Pivot. Upskill. But if you asked him to explain how purchase orders actually functioned, he'd fumble harder than a cat on a marble floor. What made it worse was that everyone was buying it. The board loved his vision, said he was trimming the fat. HR called him transformational. I called him what he was, a con man with a badge printer and a habit of hiding rot behind PowerPoints. He was bold, I'll give him that. And bold men make mistakes. Arrogant men make big ones. That month alone, I found 6 more payments to LLCs with no public footprint. Some were registered to addresses that didn't exist. One was tied to a mailbox in a strip mall next to a vape shop. And every single one, signed by him. Personally, I compiled them, tabbed them, cross-referenced them against staff names and project codes. The pattern was clear. A handful of training vendors eating hundreds of thousands of dollars, rubber-stamped by a man who didn't know our internal code for capital expenditure. Every file I uncovered was like a brick laid carefully into a wall. One he was going to slam into at full speed. But I wasn't ready to act yet. Not until the wall was high enough. Not until the weight of the proof crushed his smirk clean off his face. So I kept smiling. Kept taking notes. When he cracked another joke in the Tuesday sync about how compliance just slows down the fun, I laughed too. But in my head, I was already sharpening the knife. They called it a touch base. You ever get summoned by HR for touch base, it means one of 2 things. They are either prepping you for some performative wellness initiative, or they're buttering the skillet before they toss you in it. In my case, it was the latter, and I could smell the butter before I even sat down. Barbara, chirped the junior HR rep, the one with the fake concern eyes and a laminated wellness poster behind her desk that said embrace change. Thanks so much for making time. I didn't roll my eyes, not visibly. Just smiled, the kind of smile you give when someone tells you their essential oil pyramid scheme cured their cousin's lupus. The other woman in the room, someone new, with that vague consultant vibe, and a clipboard like it was fused to her hand, nodded like we were all just 3 gals out for lattes, not a pre-firing dry run. So, the junior rep started, folding her hands like she was about to lead us in prayer. We've been reviewing some internal routing logs, and we noticed something a bit unusual. Totally minor, but we like to be proactive, She glanced at her clipboard companion, who jumped in. It seems you've been emailing yourself a lot of documents. More than typical, we'd say. It's not really standard protocol, you know? I sipped the lukewarm coffee I brought with me black as always. My poker face didn't flinch. Sure, I said casually. I review a lot of reports over the weekend. You know how it is, finance is always shifting goalposts and I hate falling behind. Clipboard lady smiled tightly. We get that. But just going forward, we'd recommend using approved tools. Maybe a secure work laptop or our remote access portal. Translation, we're watching you now, sweetheart. So cut it out before we make this official. I nodded, agreeable as ever. Makes sense, I said. Didn't realize it was such a hot button issue. I'll adjust. But inside I was measuring their breath for signs of smoke. Someone had tipped them off. Not enough to make them accuse me of anything, no, they didn't have proof, but enough to spook them. The circle was tightening. And here's the thing about me. I don't tighten, widen. That night, I stopped emailing myself files. Not because I was scared, because I was done playing small. I spent the evening rerouting everything. I bought 2 months' worth of cloud server time on a secure offsite host under a throwaway LLC I'd set up back when I thought I'd retire early and freelance. It was still active, sitting in a forgotten drawer next to my late husband's AA chip and a keychain that said #1 data witch. I encrypted everything, named files, rewrote metadata. By the time I was done, my little grandma's meatloaf folder had grown teeth. It lived in 3 locations now, one on the encrypted thumb drive, one on the offsite cloud, and one on a burner USB tucked inside a hollowed-out box of Earl Grey in my kitchen. Come and get it, I thought. The next morning, I walked in like nothing had happened. Nodded to the HR girl when I passed her desk. She smiled back, rehearsed, plastic, wanted to rattle me. That was the whole point. Applied just enough pressure to get me to slip. But I don't slip, I document. I also started printing less, talking less. Acting, frankly, a little dumb. It's easier to stay invisible when you play the part they expect. I asked redundant questions in meetings, missed obvious file names. I even acted surprised when I couldn't find a form I knew by heart. Let them think I was slipping. Them assume the old lady was getting tired. They already wanted me gone. I could feel it. I could smell it in the way the VP stopped including me on certain email threads. In the way compliance updates suddenly got rerouted for efficiency. Good. That meant they'd underestimate me. What they didn't know was that the folder I'd named Recipes July now included a subfolder titled Vendor Fraud Preliminary. Inside were files sorted by date, project, approving authority. I wasn't just gathering data anymore. I was building a case. Because if HR had sniffed out that I was watching, it meant one of 2 things. Either someone inside was getting nervous, or the VP was starting to cover his tracks. And if he was smart enough to send HR after me, then I needed to be ready before he sent security. It was a Tuesday. Rain on the windows, stale coffee in the break room, the VP barking orders on a Zoom call like he was trying to win a hostage negotiation with buzzwords. Perfect weather for war. I'd been collecting for weeks now. What began as a handful of suspicious invoices had ballooned into a full-blown graveyard of corporate sins. By the time I sat down that morning, I had a 72-page report. Itemized, time-stamped, cross-referenced with internal finance logs, vendor databases, even screenshots of Slack messages where one procurement assistant joked, "If I approve one more of these training charges, I'm going to need a training course in ethics." Yeah, keep laughing. I named the report Red Sky at morning. Inside, each vendor had their own section. Core Path Dynamics, Talent Synergy Group, Insight Horizons, and 3 more that read like rejected names for cult. I'd broken each one down, date of onboarding, who approved them, amount paid, discrepancies between amounts on invoices and what actually cleared, and the bank routing numbers. One vendor's payments were being funneled through a holding account that, surprise, surprise, tied back to a registered agent linked to the VP's old consulting firm. Another had received $38,000 for remote empathy facilitation, approved during a month when our company had frozen travel budgets and laid off 12 warehouse workers. But the crown jewel was the internal override, the email where our VP personally overrode the audit recommendation and ordered payment to a vendor with 0 compliance clearance. I saved that one as a high-res image and slapped it right on page 1. By the time I was done formatting, the report had bookmarks, an index, and a digital trail of breadcrumbs that even a hungover intern could follow to the gates of Fraudville. But I wasn't done. I needed an outside trigger, something that couldn't be dismissed or buried by our HR department with a polite "we'll look into this." So I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in 4 years, David Chen. Back when our company still gave a damn, David was a mid-tier internal auditor. Quiet guy, sharp as hell. He once found a $9,000 accounting error buried in an 11,000-line spreadsheet, flagged it, and saved the company from a minor lawsuit. The merger came and the new regime gutted the audit team. David took a job with one of the major external audit firms downtown. I hadn't wanted to bring him in until I had something worth his time. Now I did. I sent him a single email, no fluff, no backstory. Subject, review request, red sky summary attachment. Summary red sky 7PG preview PDF body. David, hope you're well. I've been compiling something that requires independent eyes. No legal exposure to you. Just need you to read this summary and tell me if I'm crazy. If you think it's worth flagging to your folks, I'll provide full access. Appreciate your time, B. I didn't exhale after I clicked send. I just sat there, waiting. 4 hours later, he replied, Barbara, this is substantial. I'll escalate internally. Do not delete anything. Back it all up twice. And don't contact me again unless it's urgent. You've done enough. Take it from here. No exclamation points, no emojis, just that tight, professional tone that auditors use when they're about to descend like wolves in pinstripes. I smiled, just slightly. That night, I added one more backup to a separate flash drive and slid it under the lining of my purse. Then I cleared my browser history, deleted the VPN I'd used to upload the files, and shredded every paper trail that ever suggested I had eyes on anything, because I knew what came next. Not thanks, not apologies, not redemption. No, the next step was the strike. The death rattle of a man cornered by receipts. He'd sniff me out, or someone would. HR, the VP, maybe even legal, once they realized the blood was already in the water. But I wasn't scared. I was ready. Because when you spend your life cleaning up messes for other people, you learn how to leave behind the perfect one. And mine was almost done cooking. They came for me on a Wednesday. Mid-morning, just after I'd submitted a routine monthly reconciliation report, so clean it could have been framed and sold as performance art. I'd barely hit send when my phone lit up with an Outlook invite titled, HR Follow-Up, Immediate. No subject, no context, just a location, conference room B3. That's the one with no windows. I closed my laptop, slid my reading glasses into my purse, smoothed my blouse like it was any other day. But I knew, you always know, the birds go quiet. The hallway chatter shifts. Even the break room fridge seemed to hum lower, like it was holding its breath. When I walked in, they were already seated. The same junior HR rep from last time, pretending not to tremble, and next to her, a man I hadn't seen before. Early 40s, buzz cut, navy polo with security stitched over the breast like he was auditioning for the world's blandest crime procedural. Arms crossed, neutral expression. Too stiff to be comfortable, too calm to be accidental. Across the table sat the director of HR. Not the junior this time. No, this was the real deal corporate varnish incarnate. A woman whose smile was surgically detached from her eyes. Barbara, she began. No thanks for coming. No pleasantries, just a thin-lipped smile and a folder. She pushed it across the table like it was a gift. We've completed our review of your file activity. I didn't sit, just rested my hands gently on the back of the chair. The junior rep cleared her throat. It appears you've been transmitting internal documents to external email addresses, including a number of financial records. I tilted my head slightly, said nothing. This is a clear violation of company policy, the director added. Regardless of intent, we have to treat this as a data security breach. There it was, the script, the same one they'd used on Dave from procurement when he downloaded budget reports to prep for his MBA case study. The same one they'd used on Teresa when she saved a PowerPoint to edit during her kid's hospital stay. It didn't matter what the files were. What mattered was that I had them. Now they needed a reason to sweep me out fast before someone started asking questions about why I had them in the first place. And the security guy? Just window dressing. A little humiliation to wrap it up nice and tight. Effective immediately, the director continued, sliding over a typed memo. Your employment is terminated. Still, I said nothing. She leaned forward, expectant now, like she was daring me to make a scene. Instead, I reached into my purse, pulled out my company badge, set it on the table, gently, precisely. Then I smiled. You're absolutely right, I said, in a tone so even it could have chilled the sun. The room went still for half a breath too long. Then the director nodded sharply, relief flashing across her features. "Security will escort you to collect your belongings," she said. "You have 15 minutes." I nodded. No eye contact. Just turned and walked out like a woman leaving a dentist's office. Junior HR rep stood awkwardly. She didn't know what to do with her hands. I caught her mouthing something, maybe sorry, maybe you okay, but I didn't give her the satisfaction of a reply. My walk back to my desk was a parade of polite horror. Nobody spoke. Nobody looked directly at me. Just flickering glances, keyboards clacking faster than normal, like guilt could be typed away. My cubicle already looked like a ghost town. Warned IT before I even got the invite. My access was cut, my drives disconnected, my files archived into some risk folder that would never see daylight again. I grabbed the only things that mattered: my planner, my coffee mug, the framed photo of my dog, and a blue gel pen that had somehow made it 15 years without running out. The security guard followed at a respectful distance, radio silent. Probably bored, probably wondering if I'd throw a stapler or break down sobbing. Instead, I handed in my lanyard and walked to the exit like I was leaving early for lunch. No tears, no yelling, no begging. I'd already won. Because by the time their little inquisition began, the final report had already been handed off. The drive was in my lawyer's possession. The files were mirrored across 3 continents. The board hadn't seen it yet. The auditors hadn't knocked on their doors. But they would. And when they did, they'd realize something far worse than a data security breach had taken place. Someone had been watching the whole time, and that someone had receipts. The night after they fired me, I didn't cry, didn't rage, didn't pour a sad woman whiskey and howl into the void like some HR rom-com cliché. I fed my dog, reheated leftover chicken marsala, and watched a rerun of Jeopardy, like it was any other Wednesday night in Ohio. Then, around 9:47 p.m., I got the text. Delivered. Timestamp confirmed. M. My attorney Mitchell Green, retired Air Force JAG, quiet as a taxidermist, sharp as a box cutter. He hadn't said much when I gave him the drive earlier that day. Just took it, scanned the file tree, and nodded. "I know who to send this to," he'd said. He wasn't bluffing. By morning, the sky was clear, the coffee was hot. The company I used to work for was preparing to meet God, or at least the forensic audit team from Silverstein and Holt. At 9:02 a.m., 2 unmarked sedans pulled into the parking lot. 4 people stepped out in tailored suits and grim expressions. Not the kind of, "Hey, let's grab a brainstorm" muffin suits you see in marketing. No. These were suits that whispered compliance subpoenas and disgorgement penalties. They didn't check in at reception, walked straight to the executive wing. I wasn't there to see it, of course, but I didn't have to be. Sources have a funny way of keeping in touch when they sense the ship tilting. One of the accountants, bless her anxious heart, called me from the stairwell. "They're here," she whispered, like, here. They didn't even knock. Just flashed some badge and asked for the CFO and general counsel. By 9:14, the finance floor had gone silent, kind of silence that clings to your skin like static before a lightning strike. Slack messages dried up. Screens stopped refreshing. People stared at their monitors like looking busy would save them. At 9:23, 2 board members, including the one who always called me kiddo despite being only 6 years older, were pulled from a quarterly planning review. At 9:27, the VP was summoned. Private review, they called it. Not a meeting, not a sync. Review, translation. Get in the room, sit your fraud-slicked ass down, and start explaining the unexplainable. The door closed behind him. No one followed. My phone stayed silent. I didn't need updates anymore. I had all the proof I needed in the response I didn't get. Because when a company's audit team shows up unannounced and the board gets yanked out of meetings without warning, there's only one conclusion. Someone got to them first. That someone had to be outside their control. I imagined the VP sweating through his tailored shirt as they asked about core path dynamics and insight horizons, and why a shell company with no employees had received $87,000 in training reimbursements over 6 weeks. I imagined him trying to bluff his way through, only to be handed his own emails. The override, the signatures, the timestamps, the logins, his digital fingerprints all over the crime scene. I pictured his face when they showed him the Slack message from procurement. "Hey, is this one of yours? There's no W9. Weird," and his reply, "Just push it through." Don't overthink it. They had it all now. The emails, the invoices, the fake addresses. The approvals traced straight to his name. The buried audit flags. And my quiet, consistent memos, never confrontational, never inflammatory, just factual, all ignored. They'd realize, too late, that the woman they fired for emailing herself documents had actually been the last thin thread keeping them from stepping into a legal woodchipper. And I was home, phone off, slippers on, sipping cinnamon tea while my dog snored beside me. Because once the report was out of my hands, I didn't need to fight anymore. My silence would do the work for me, and theirs was just beginning. In the boardroom, the silence was molasses thick, one of those silences that makes you hear things you're not supposed to. The buzz of the overhead fluorescents, the nervous shifting of a leather chair, the faint click of someone's jaw clenching just a little too hard. The lead auditor, a short man with a surgeon's posture and a stare sharp enough to shave rust, stood at the head of the conference table holding a piece of paper. Not waving it, not brandishing it, just holding it, like a priest holds a page of scripture before judgment falls. This vendor, he said, voice level, calm as death, who approved this? He tapped the corner of the invoice with one neatly manicured finger. Insight Horizons LLC. Invoice hash 8817. Amount $38,450. Listed services, empathy optimization workshops. He looked up. Who approved this? Across the table. VP blinked like he'd been punched in the back of the head. That's impossible, he stammered. That invoice shouldn't even, that was part of. The auditor didn't blink, didn't move, just let the silence stretch until it felt like a wire pulled across the throats of everyone in the room. Let me rephrase, the auditor said softly. Whose credentials were used to sign off on this payment? He turned the paper around and laid it on the table, facing the VP. There, full 12-point Helvetica was the digital signature. Approved by VP Operations D. Halpern, the VP's mouth opened, closed, opened again. There must be, this must have been duplicated. The auditor raised an eyebrow. Forged, or did someone overthink it? Like you told procurement in the Slack message, he reached for the printed thread and slid it forward, dated June 2nd, 11:38 a.m. Where you said, just push it through, overthink it. The CFO shifted in his seat. He'd been pale since the meeting began, but now he looked corpse-adjacent. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the summary packet in front of him, each page a punch to the gut. Vendor logs, duplicate payments, compliance override screenshots, side-by-side comparisons of signature chains. And on the final page, neatly boxed in red, a list of flagged invoices. Each one linked to a document audit, each one with a timestamp. And beside each one a note, flagged by B. Langston, Barbara, the woman they fired 24 hours earlier for unauthorized data transmission. The woman whose only weapon had been a spreadsheet and the audacity to believe truth still mattered. These payments, the CFO croaked, tapping the page like it might bleed, were all flagged. Already, the auditor nodded. Every single one. Internal logs show flags were submitted in real time, marked for compliance escalation. None were followed up on. All were signed off within 48 hours by your VP of Operations. He looked back at the VP. Do you deny the signature? The VP's lips moved, but no sound came out. Just breathe. We need to discuss this internally, the head of HR finally said, rising too fast, panic bubbling behind her botox smile. Let's pause here and regroup with legal. The auditor didn't even glance at her. No, we're not pausing. You don't get to pause federal audit escalation. He turned back to the board. What you're dealing with here is sustained fraud, a pattern of deliberate obfuscation. Your own employee flagged it multiple times. You ignored her. You fired her. He picked up the summary again and flipped it over. The chain of emails from HR indicates she was dismissed specifically for transmitting the same documents that would have proven this fraud, documents which are now corroborated by the original entries in your internal financial systems. He let that hang in the air like smoke from a slow burn. And the worst part, he said, voice dropping to a near whisper, she never leaked. She never went public. She followed protocol. She documented. She escalated. She gave you a chance to do the right thing. The CFO had buried his face in his hands. The VP staring straight ahead, eyes wide, breathing shallow, like a man watching the ocean rise through his windshield. The auditor gathered his papers. We'll be initiating a full forensic sweep, he said. Your systems are already under freeze order. and the board will be receiving our preliminary report by end of day." He paused. "And for what it's worth, you should have listened to Barbara Langston." No one said her name again in that room. The VP didn't leave through the front door. Two compliance officers walked him out a side entrance 30 minutes later, his face a waxy mask, hands trembling as he dropped his badge on the security desk. The head of HR spent the afternoon locked in her office. The board met again at 4 o'clock. The words legal exposure, clawbacks, and SEC inquiry were tossed around like grenades. And Barbara never answered their calls. Not the CFO's voicemail begging to talk this through. Not the HR director's email titled "Let's Reconnect." Not the board member who called her kiddo asking, "Can we do lunch next week?" Just to catch up. She didn't need to respond. She didn't need to return. She didn't even need to speak. Because everything that needed to be said was already on the record. And her silence was the loudest sound they'd ever heard. Appreciate you sticking around, you wise old rebels. Smash that subscribe button, or this fossil might just cause another epic fiasco.